The last thing my grandmother ever said to me was, "Keep this house full of life, Em. That's all I want." I buried her 6 months later, and 1 month after that, I found myself standing on her crooked front porch, holding a ring of keys that felt heavier than they should have. I hadn't been back in years, not since I left for college, but the place looked almost untouched, as if time had forgotten it or preserved it just for me. That's what I thought anyway. For the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe. No students screaming in my face, no papers to grade, no parents breathing down my neck about test scores, just birds and wind and the house. Her house. Mine now. I came to stay the summer. Fix things up. Paint the shutters. Replace the well pump. Heal. But that plan lasted 7 days. I remember the sound of gravel crunching under tires. I looked out the kitchen window, confused. Nobody was supposed to be here. No one even knew I was in town. But there he was, Uncle Jim, with his new wife, a woman I barely knew, and her teenage daughter stepping out behind them. 3 people, 4 suitcases. One lie I hadn't heard yet. They acted surprised to see me. "Oh," Jim said, laughing like it was some sitcom moment. "Emma, we didn't think you'd be here already." I didn't say anything, just held the door open because that's what Grandma would have done. I was raised to be polite. That was my first mistake. They made themselves at home in under an hour. Jim took the master bedroom. His wife, Charlene, complained about the smell of the linens. The girl, Hannah, walked around with AirPods in, not saying a word. That night, over dry pasta and microwave sauce, Jim said it. "You know, Mom always talked about keeping this place in the family. I think she'd be happy we're here together." He smiled like we were bonding, like I was 12 again, and he was still my favorite uncle, sneaking me candy before dinner. But something in me locked up. I didn't smile back. I wanted to ask him how he even knew Grandma was gone. He hadn't visited her in years. Never called, never wrote. She used to sit on that front porch every Sunday, waiting for someone who never came. I bit my tongue. That was my second mistake. Charlene asked me between sips of wine, "So, what are your plans with the house? You can't keep a place like this up on a teacher's salary, can you?" It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Jim jumped in quickly. "We've been thinking. Maybe fix the place up. You know, rent it out sometimes. Airbnb's big in this area now. Could be a great investment for all of us." All of us. That's when I knew something was wrong. But I nodded, smiled, cleared the dishes. Grandma always said, "Let them talk. The truth waits." For the next few days, they started changing things. Quietly, but quickly. Family photos disappeared from the hallway. Charlene brought in new furniture from a rental company. "Modern look," she said. Jim called a contractor about knocking down a wall. I found the blueprints in the trash, under a wine bottle. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Just getting a head start. No harm in that." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I smiled. That was my third mistake. Then one morning, I found Charlene in Grandma's closet, throwing things into garbage bags. "Do you need help with that?" I asked. She turned, didn't flinch. "These old things? Nobody needs this clutter." I stared at the bag in her hand. Inside was Grandma's church hat, the one she wore to every Sunday service, even when she was too weak to walk. I took it from the bag without saying a word. Charlene didn't stop me, but she didn't look sorry either. That night, I sat outside under the old oak tree, the one Grandma planted after her husband died. The moon was high, and the house looked small again, like it had when I was a child, like it needed me. I started asking myself questions I didn't want to ask. What if the will wasn't real? What if they had something else? They were so confident, too confident. Jim kept saying things like, "She told me this place was ours too." Charlene dropped lines like, "We'll fix the paperwork later." But Grandma wasn't careless. She was deliberate. Every birthday, every letter, every jar in her pantry, labeled, dated, perfect. She wouldn't leave things unfinished, unless someone had hidden them, unless someone wanted me to believe I didn't belong here. And that's when I remembered the old laptop, the one Grandma never used, the one we all laughed at her for keeping even when it stopped working. It was still in her sewing room, bottom drawer, under 3 layers of linen, covered in dust, cold as stone. I powered it on, nothing. I plugged it in, waited, then waited more, and when the screen finally flickered, one folder sat in the center of the desktop, for Emma, only Emma. The folder opened with a click that felt louder than it should have been, like the house itself was listening. Inside were just 2 files, a letter and a video. I read the letter first. Grandma's name at the bottom, her words in that formal, careful tone she always used when things mattered. "If you are reading this, it means they've come for the house. They'll lie. They'll say I changed my mind. They'll talk about family, about fairness, about things they never gave me when I was alive. Don't believe them, Emma. The house is yours. Everything is already in place. But you must look where no one else will, under the first step of the back stairs. That's where I kept the real papers. The rest is noise." I reread the last part 3 times. Under the first step. The back stairs led down to the cellar. I hadn't been down there since I arrived. Too afraid of the spiders, the mold, the smell of dirt and memory. Now I moved without hesitation. The old staircase creaked under my weight. I knelt at the bottom, pried up the first board with a rusted screwdriver I found in the kitchen. Dust choked the air, but beneath it, wrapped in plastic and bound with string, was a manila envelope. Inside were the originals, the deed, the signed will, notarized, stamped, dated, all in my name. No room for confusion, no room for lies. I just sat there on the cold concrete floor for a long time, holding that paper like it was a weapon or a shield. I thought I might cry, but nothing came. Not joy, not anger, just a stillness, like something inside me had finally stopped shaking. I took the documents upstairs, laid them out on the kitchen table, then I clicked on the second file. It was a video, grainy, filmed on the built-in webcam. Grandma in her favorite cardigan, hair pinned back like always, sitting at this very table. She looked tired, but sharp. "Emma," she said, "if they're making you doubt, you need to hear it from me. I left this house to you, only you. I warned your uncle. I warned Charlene. If they're there now, they don't belong. I don't care what stories they tell you. This house is your legacy. You earned it, with every visit, every phone call, every birthday you never missed. I love you. Now stand up for yourself." The video cut off suddenly. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking now for real. It was all true. I hadn't imagined any of it, the things they were saying, the way they acted. It was all an attempt to push me out, and I had almost let them. I almost thanked them for it. The next day, I kept quiet, didn't show them what I'd found, didn't say a word about the video, the envelope, the proof. I just watched. Listened. Charlene spent the morning on speakerphone with a decorator in Asheville. I heard her describe the living room as rustic chic, but we'll tear down the wood paneling. She laughed, said, "I've always hated that kitchen floor." Jim ordered a dumpster for the weekend. He told me over dinner that it was time to get serious about the renovation. I nodded, asked if he needed help. I didn't sleep that night, just stared at the ceiling, counted the water spots above my bed, thought about every Christmas we spent here, every letter Grandma wrote me from this house, every quiet moment she gave me when my parents were fighting and I had nowhere else to go. They weren't just stealing a building, they were trying to erase her, erase me. So I waited. On Friday, they left for the weekend, a family hike, as Jim called it. He made sure to mention it at breakfast, loud enough for me to hear. Back Sunday evening. Hopefully this rain holds off. I smiled, waved goodbye as they pulled out of the driveway in Charlene's SUV. And then I got to work. I called a locksmith before their car disappeared past the trees. Emergency job, I told him. House locks, every door. How soon can you be here? He came within an hour. Middle-aged man, quiet, didn't ask questions. I offered him cash up front. He nodded once and got started. While he worked, I moved fast. Boxed up Charlene's kitchen gadgets, the new throw pillows, the framed photo of her daughter on the fireplace mantel, the one that had replaced the photo of Grandma in her garden. I labeled everything, Jim and Charlene, set it all in the garage, neatly stacked by the door. Next, I took the family documents, the will, the deed, the notarized letter, and made copies. I placed the originals in a fireproof box I found in the upstairs closet, then slid the box under the bed. I printed Grandma's letter and taped it to the inside of the front door. On top of it, I clipped a copy of the deed. Then I wrote my own note, just 6 words. "You lied, I didn't." When the locksmith finished, I tipped him generously. He left without a word. And then I stood alone in the quiet of that house, finally safe behind locks they no longer controlled. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Not because I doubted what I'd done, but because it was never supposed to come to this. Family wasn't supposed to be the threat. Love wasn't supposed to rot like this. But here we were. I made tea that night, the way Grandma used to. Loose leaves, not bags. I sat on the front porch with her old quilt around my shoulders, listening to the wind in the trees, and I waited, because I knew they'd be back, and next time, they wouldn't knock. I heard the tires before I saw the car. It was late afternoon Sunday, the rain had stopped, but the sky hung heavy, that kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. I stood in the hallway, out of view from the windows, hands clenched at my sides. The tea on the table had gone cold. I hadn't touched it. Their SUV slowed as it came up the gravel, then stopped. I didn't move. Doors opened, then silence, then footsteps crunching toward the front porch. I waited for the knock, but it didn't come. Instead, the rattle of the door handle, a tug, another tug. Then I heard it, Jim's voice, low, angry, muffled. What the hell? He tried the door again, harder this time. Then came Charlene's voice, sharp and cutting, floating through the wood like a blade. Did you give her a key to the deadbolt? There wasn't a deadbolt, Jim snapped back. That's new. I stepped closer to the door, but didn't open it. Let them stand in the confusion. Let it twist in their stomachs, the way it had twisted in mine when I saw them unloading suitcases without asking. I heard movement toward the back of the house. They were checking other doors, each one now locked, every window sealed. I stood in the living room, in front of the fireplace, watching shadows move behind curtains. They circled the house like dogs looking for a weakness in the fence. Then, banging on the front door. Hard! Emma! Jim barked. Open the damn door. I took my time, waited. Let the silence stretch until it started choking them. Then I opened it, just a crack, enough to see their faces. Jim's was red. Charlene's was pale and twisted. The girl, Hannah, stood back, arms folded, earbuds in, her eyes flicking between us like she wasn't sure if this was real. Why are the locks changed? Jim demanded. Because the house isn't yours, I said. His mouth twitched. That performative calm he always used when he was trying not to blow up. Emma, he said, like he was explaining something to a child. This isn't how we do things in this family. That word again. Family. It didn't mean what they thought it did. I stepped out onto the porch, calm, centered. Behind me, taped inside the door frame, were the documents. The deed, the letter, the copy of the will. Jim hadn't noticed them yet, so I turned, pulled the envelope down, and handed it to him. He looked at the paper like it was written in another language. Charlene snatched it from his hands, scanned it fast, her lips moving silently, trying to make sense of the dates and stamps. Then she looked up. This can't be real, she said. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was heavier than anything I could say. Then I pulled out the final piece. Grandma's video. My old laptop, already cued, volume up, screen turned toward them. I hit play. Her voice filled the porch. If they're making you doubt, you need to hear it from me. Charlene stepped back like she'd been slapped. Jim stared at the screen, his expression collapsing in slow motion. He didn't speak, didn't argue, didn't even blink. And when the video ended, when Grandma said, "I warned them," I closed the laptop and waited. Jim finally broke the silence. She didn't mean this. She was sick. You know that. I didn't flinch. She wasn't sick when she signed it, not when she filmed it, not when she left it in a locked folder with my name on it. Charlene stepped forward. You can't just... You don't have the right to... No, I said. You don't. She opened her mouth again, but there was nothing left to say. Hannah hadn't spoken at all. She stood by the steps, arms still crossed, her eyes locked on mine. For the first time, she looked not angry, not annoyed, just tired. She knew, I think. She'd known the whole time, maybe not the details, but the feeling that something here wasn't fair. Jim dropped the envelope onto the porch floor. You think this makes you the good guy? He muttered. I looked at him for a long time. No, I said. It makes me the one who didn't lie. And then I stepped back inside, closed the door, locked it. I stood there in the silence, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for the shouting, the threats, the pounding fists. But none of it came, just the sound of footsteps retreating, gravel crunching, an engine starting, and then nothing. The house was quiet again. I walked through each room, checking every window, every lock. I touched the wooden banister, ran my fingers along the edges of the kitchen counter, the spot Grandma used to keep her flour tin. Everything was still here. Everything they tried to erase. I sat down at the table and stared at the front door for a long time. Not because I thought they'd come back, but because I knew they would, just not in the way they thought. They would come back in rumors, in cold shoulders at family weddings, in whispered comments about how I stole what wasn't mine. They'd come back in guilt, in silence, in their own children asking questions they didn't want to answer. But the house was finally still, and I wasn't going anywhere. I thought I would feel relief when they drove away. I thought locking the door behind them would make the air feel cleaner, lighter. But the silence that filled the house after they left wasn't peaceful. It was dangerous. It was the kind of silence that starts crawling up your spine in the middle of the night, whispering questions you don't want to answer. Like, what if they came back? Not with suitcases this time. Not smiling. What if they brought lawyers? What if they found a way around the will? What if Jim decided to contest it? Claim undue influence, mental decline, fabrication? I knew what I had. The documents were airtight, but fear doesn't care about paperwork. Fear lives in the corners of the house you don't look at after dark. Fear grows in the pause between each phone ring you don't pick up. The next morning, I started hearing things. First, it was the wind. I told myself it was just wind. Branches scraping the roof, floorboards shifting, a door creaking open on its own. I checked every lock again, every window. They were shut tight, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. Not a person, not a thing. An energy, something unwanted that hadn't left with the car. I spent the day scrubbing the kitchen, not cleaning, scrubbing, like I was trying to erase something I couldn't name. I opened every cabinet, dumped expired cans, replaced the curtains with old ones I found boxed up in the attic, washed every dish. Twice. At one point, I found myself staring at the photo wall. Half the frames were still missing. Charlene had moved them, replaced them. I hadn't put Grandma's pictures back yet. The wall looked hollow, like it had been picked clean. That night, I didn't sleep, and then I started thinking about the things they'd touched. The mattress in Grandma's room, the blankets, the bathroom mirror Charlene used every morning. Even the stairs felt different under my feet, like they no longer remembered me. By the second day, I stopped pretending I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I was afraid of being watched. Every car that passed, even in the distance, made my heart knock against my ribs. I started keeping the lights off at night, just in case someone was looking in. Started sleeping with my phone clutched in one hand. I knew how paranoia worked. I wasn't new to it. But this was something else. This was the feeling of being invaded, not just physically, but emotionally, like they had gotten under my skin and left something rotting there. On the third morning, I opened the mailbox and found nothing. No letter, no threats, just silence. That was worse, because it meant I was waiting for something I couldn't predict. I started making copies of the will. 3 more sets, one for my lawyer, one for the safe deposit box I opened in town, and one I hid behind the pantry drywall. In a Ziploc bag, duct taped behind a loose panel, because part of me still didn't trust the law to be enough. I began writing everything down, documenting every interaction I'd had with Jim and Charlene. Dates, words, actions. If they came back, I wanted every truth on paper. But I wasn't just protecting myself legally. I was anchoring myself to something real. Because the longer I stayed in that house alone, the more I started to lose track of time. The days blended, the nights stretched. I found myself speaking out loud sometimes, not to anyone, just to fill the silence. I'd walk into a room and say, "Okay, this stays." Or, "Grandma would have hated that rug." Like I needed to remind the house I still belonged to it, or maybe the other way around. And then something shifted. On the 4th day, I came home from the hardware store and saw muddy boot prints on the porch. Fresh. One set, heading toward the door, not away. The locks were still untouched, but the prints didn't lie. Someone had come back and hadn't bothered knocking. They just stood there, watching, waiting. I scanned the woods, called out, nothing moved. I took photos of the footprints, compared them to the tread on Jim's boots in an old family photo I still had. They matched. I didn't call the police. What would I say? That my uncle might have stood on my porch? That fear was dripping through the walls? Instead, I bought cameras. 4 of them, mounted them under the eaves myself. The blinking red lights made me feel less alone. But at night, when I watched the footage back, I started seeing flashes. Flickers, not people, but shadows, not ghosts. Just movement, barely there. I told myself it was wind, bugs, dust, but I still didn't sleep. And then came the envelope. No return address. Slipped under the front door while I was in the back garden. Inside, a photo of me, standing in the kitchen, taken through the window. No note, no signature, just me, in my own house, unaware. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, holding that photo, the air gone from my lungs. And I knew right then that locking the door wasn't enough, because the threat had never been just about keys or documents. It was about being unwelcome, not just by them, by the past, by the blood I shared, by the things I thought were mine. They stopped calling. No texts, no voicemails, no emails. And that was the most terrifying part, because when someone screams at you, at least you know where they are. You know what they want. Silence is worse. Silence is planning. I knew I had closed it. I closed it again. The next morning, same thing. I stopped checking it altogether. Started having groceries delivered to the edge of the property. Left a cooler out by the road with a $20 tip inside. Never saw the driver. That was fine. I didn't want to see anyone anymore. Even the locals were turning. At the general store, people stopped saying hello. Stopped making eye contact. The girl who used to chat with me about baking soda brands now just rang me up without a word. The old man at the post office wouldn't meet my eyes. One woman, someone who knew my grandmother well, finally whispered something as I passed her in the frozen food aisle. She said, "You should have just let them have it." That was all. Not hello. Not how are you. Just let them have it. Like I had taken something that wasn't mine. Like love could be stolen by bloodlines and manipulation. That's when I knew Jim and Charlene were still working behind the scenes. They weren't trying to win legally anymore. They were trying to isolate me. They knew I'd cracked once before. After Mom died, after the divorce, after the panic attacks made me quit my first teaching job. They knew silence was where I broke. And they were right, because that night I sat in the laundry room, the smallest, safest feeling place in the whole house, and stared at the dryer until the timer beeped. Didn't cry, didn't move, just stared. Like if I blinked, someone would walk in through the back door, or worse, not walk in, just stand there, watching. I stopped trusting the locks, installed new ones. I nailed shut 2 of the windows in the guest room and wedged a chair under the doorknob in the basement. I knew it was overkill, but fear doesn't care about logic. Then one morning, I got a knock. Not the door. The window, just one tap. Soft, quick. Then gone, I ran outside. No one there, but in the dirt leading from the garden to the side of the house, fresh prints, size 10 boots, Jim's size. I called the sheriff's office that afternoon, told them everything, the visit, the changed locks, the documents, the photo, the silence. The deputy who came out was polite, but tired. Young guy. Looked like he barely believed his own badge. He took notes, nodded a lot, said, "We'll keep an eye out." That was it. He didn't ask for the photo, didn't take a statement, didn't promise anything, just keep an eye out. 2 nights later, I got a call from a block number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, there was no voice, just 28 seconds of breathing, slow, even almost calm. I saved it, sent it to my lawyer. He said there wasn't much we could do unless they said something explicit. Like being watched in my own home wasn't enough. Like being hunted quietly wasn't real unless someone said it out loud. I started leaving lights on all night. Stopped going into town. Stopped answering calls from anyone who wasn't already in my phone. Isolation became normal. Silence became background noise. And then came the paperwork. A notice, hand-delivered, a petition to contest the will. Jim had filed it with the county court. Claimed Grandma was not of sound mind when she signed. Claimed undue influence. Claimed fraud. I sat on the porch and read every line with shaking hands. And here's the part that broke me. He used my visits as proof. He said I had pressured her, that I'd isolated her from the rest of the family, that I'd taken control of her finances. A lie so big I nearly laughed. But there it was, in legal language, stamped and filed. Charlene co-signed as a witness. Even Hannah was listed as a declarant. I couldn't believe it. That girl barely spoke 3 words to me. And now she was saying I manipulated an old woman into changing her will. I went inside, pulled the laptop out again, watched Grandma's video 4 more times, paused on the moment her eyes looked straight into the lens and she said, "They'll say I changed my mind. Don't believe them." I wanted to scream, but all I could do was breathe and wait. My court date was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to live in limbo. 3 weeks to prepare for a legal battle I hadn't asked for. 3 weeks to live in a house that no longer felt like mine. Not because it wasn't legally mine, but because they had poisoned it with doubt. I started sleeping in the attic. Something about the height made me feel safer, further away from the ground, from the doors. But even up there, the walls whispered. They whispered, what if? What if the court sided with them? What if the town turned fully against me? What if Grandma's voice wasn't enough? I wasn't looking for anything. By that point, all I wanted was to feel safe in the house again. Just one moment where I didn't flinch when a floorboard creaked or wonder if the wind outside was really the wind. I hadn't been in the attic long, a week maybe. I moved a small mattress up there, some books, a lamp. It felt separate, untouched by the poison they'd left behind, and it was quiet. But one night, as I shifted in bed, I noticed something strange behind the insulation near the far wall, a corner that looked off, like it had been patched over. Badly, my grandmother was meticulous. She didn't do anything halfway. If something was covered, there was a reason. The next morning, I pulled it open. The insulation gave way with a dry hiss. Behind it, wood slats, old and dusty, and tucked in the gap between them, wrapped in faded plastic and twine, was a small black notebook. I didn't recognize it. That alone was strange. I thought I knew every corner of this house, every drawer and box and labeled storage bin. But this was hidden, deliberately. I sat down on the attic floor, peeled the twine loose, and opened the first page. Her handwriting, not the neat, slow cursive she used in letters. This was faster, tighter, edgy, like her hand had been shaking, or like she was afraid someone might see it. The entries weren't dated, but I could guess the timeline. They started right after Jim showed up for the first time in years. He hadn't come to reconnect. He'd come to circle. He asked about the deed, about her health, about plans for the property. He brought Charlene with him, claimed they were considering downsizing, asked about co-signing power of attorney. Grandma said no, and after that, things changed. She wrote about missing mail, about documents she couldn't find. She mentioned phone calls that disconnected suddenly, bank statements arriving late. She was being watched too. Followed maybe, once, she wrote that she saw Jim outside the post office, standing by her car. Just standing, not saying anything. Charlene called it checking in, but Grandma called it what it was, circling. She started making copies of everything, hiding them around the house. Not just the will, not just the deed, everything. There were mentions of a safe deposit box, one I didn't know about. Mentions of a second letter, written in case the first is destroyed. Mentions of a memory card taped beneath a floorboard. I stopped reading halfway through because my hands were shaking too hard. She knew, even before I did. She knew they'd come for the house, knew they'd try to rewrite her choices, knew they'd use the silence, the distance, the confusion. She knew, and she left me breadcrumbs. I spent the rest of the day following them. I ripped open the floorboard under the kitchen sink, found the memory card. I used my laptop to open it. There were dozens of files, scans, photos, handwritten letters, receipts, timeline logs of every visit, every phone call from Jim. One audio recording, a voicemail. It was Jim's voice. Drunk, slurring, telling her she'd be sorry for cutting out her own blood, that some houses burn just fine, no matter what paper says. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. That voicemail alone would bury his case. I backed up everything, uploaded copies to cloud storage, sent another set to my lawyer. Then I went to the courthouse, not to wait for their move. To make mine, I filed for a restraining order, submitted the voicemail, the surveillance photo, the contestation notice, the threats. The photo of the boots on my porch, the breathing voicemail. The clerk looked up at me halfway through reading. She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. It was the first time in weeks someone looked at me like I wasn't crazy. Back home, I returned to the notebook. I read every word, not because I needed more proof, but because I needed to feel her again, to know I wasn't imagining the weight of what she left behind. She wrote about me, about how I was the only one who listened when she talked about the garden, the only one who asked about her pain meds, the only one who remembered to buy the soft tissues she liked when her nose bled in the winter. She wrote that I was the only person she trusted, the only one who never made her feel like a burden. She ended one entry with just 3 words. Protect this place. That was all. No sign-off. No signature. Just that. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. And I finally cried. Not from fear. Not even from anger. But from grief. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about every woman who'd ever been silenced by someone who thought paperwork mattered more than memory, more than truth, more than love. I wasn't going to let them erase her, and I wasn't going to let them break me. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn, didn't need an alarm, my body knew. I had barely slept anyway. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something colder, sharper. Like the part of me that used to hope had turned to steel overnight. I ironed my blouse twice, printed every document 3 times, labeled the folders with sticky tabs and filed them by color. Legal, personal, digital evidence. The courtroom was small, old. One of those places where the ceiling fan creaks and everything smells like paper and polish. There were only 7 other people in the room. I took my seat, second row, front right, alone. And then they walked in, Jim in a suit that didn't fit anymore. Charlene behind him, her heels too loud for a room that small. Hannah trailed last, arms crossed, earbuds tucked in. She didn't make eye contact. They were laughing. I watched them, quietly, the way Jim patted the bailiff on the shoulder, the way Charlene leaned in and whispered something, smiling like this was a parent-teacher conference, not a legal dispute. That was the moment I realized something important. They thought this was already over. They believed the weight of their version of the truth would be heavier than mine. That their confidence would be louder than my evidence. They didn't come to win. They came to crush. The judge entered, gavel, rise, sit. Formalities passed like molasses. Jim's lawyer opened first, said words like manipulation and diminished capacity, painted Grandma as fragile, lonely, confused, called me an opportunist, a well-meaning but overwhelmed young woman who maybe didn't realize how much influence she had. He spoke for 10 minutes, then Jim took the stand and lied. Smoothly, like someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror. He said he visited Grandma every week. He said she told him multiple times that she wanted him to handle things after she was gone. He said I had always been sweet, but wasn't emotionally stable. Charlene followed. Tears. Tissue. Perfect performance. She called me troubled, claimed I'd shown up uninvited, claimed Grandma seemed scared the last time they saw her. Then they rested their case. Their lawyer looked at mine, as if daring him to try. My lawyer stood. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. He played the voicemail first. Jim's voice. Drunk, angry, slurring, calling Grandma a fool, threatening her, saying he didn't care what the paper said. The house is mine either way. You could feel the air shift in the courtroom, like someone had opened a window no one knew was there. Jim didn't look up. Charlene froze. Then came the documents, the will, the deed, the signed, notarized dates, then Grandma's video, projected on the wall, her face, her words, her clarity. If they're making you doubt, you need to hear it from me. Even the judge watched it to the end. Silence followed. Thick, undeniable. And then I spoke. I didn't want to, but I had to. I told them about the notebook in the attic, about the fear she lived in those final months, about the locked files, the hidden papers, the backup plans. I told them about the neighbors who stopped talking to me, the mailbox left open, the photo slid under my door, the knock on the window, the silence, the breathing voicemail, and through it all, I didn't cry. Not once. Because this wasn't grief anymore. This was truth, and truth, when it finally lands, doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It just sits there like stone and dares you to move it. The judge adjourned for deliberation. We waited in separate rooms. I sat alone. They sat together, still whispering, but not smiling anymore. When the verdict came, it was simple. Motion to contest the will. Denied, restraining order. Approved, all rights and ownership of the property. Upheld. It was over. At least the legal part. But that's not the part that stayed with me. It was what happened outside the courthouse. On the sidewalk, after the decision, Jim passed by me, didn't look my way. Charlene did. And for the first time, she wasn't angry. She looked afraid, because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of her. And Hannah? She hesitated, then looked me in the eyes, and I saw it. Not regret, not sympathy, just understanding. Like maybe, just maybe, She had seen too much from the inside. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then turned and followed them. No words, just wind. Later that night, back at the house, I stood on the porch where this had all started, held Grandma's notebook in one hand, and looked out at the dark. No fear this time, no noise, just quiet, and peace that felt real. I thought it would feel like winning, that walking back into the house with the court behind me would feel like crossing a finish line, that some part of the weight would lift, but it didn't. It sat there, heavier, if anything, because the silence wasn't danger anymore. Now it was just silence. No more legal threats, no more knocks at the window, no more fear. And yet I kept waiting for a shoe that had already dropped, for a fight that had already been won. But the bruises, the ones they left behind without laying a single finger on me, hadn't faded. I couldn't explain it to anyone, not even to myself. How do you explain grief for someone who's still alive? That's what it felt like with Jim. He was my uncle. I grew up watching him laugh with Grandma on the porch. He used to slip me extra pie when no one was looking. He taught me how to skip rocks. Now I had his voice saved as evidence in a folder labeled threats, and it haunted me. Not because I doubted what I did, but because I missed the version of him I once knew, the version he chose to bury for a piece of property. That's the part no one talks about. Not in court, not in therapy, not on the other side of a restraining order. That even when the truth is on your side, it can still hurt to carry. I started avoiding the rooms they'd touched, the bedroom they claimed, the guest bathroom Charlene stocked with her perfumes, the hallway where they hung their own photos over Grandma's. I knew they were gone, but it felt like I could still smell them. Some mornings I woke up thinking I'd hear the front door open, that I'd hear their voices in the kitchen. But all I heard was my own breath, and it sounded wrong inside the quiet. I didn't tell anyone when the anxiety started showing up again. The tight chest, the short breaths, the spiral thoughts that looped through my head like a bad song. You won, I'd remind myself, but it didn't feel like winning. I started pacing the house late at night, following the old floorboards like they might tell me something new. I opened drawers just to hear the sound of them closing. Sometimes I talked to Grandma, not out loud, just in my head. Asked her if she knew what she was leaving behind, if she had any idea what her choice would cost me. And then I'd feel the shame crawl up my neck, because how dare I blame her? She did what was right. She trusted me, and I still resented the mess. That's what healing looked like, I guess. Guilt in new clothes. People in town started talking to me again, slowly. The woman at the store asked how I was doing. The post office clerk stopped pretending I didn't exist. Someone left a pie on my porch. No note. It helped, but not enough. So I started cleaning, not tidying, restoring. I took down everything they'd touched. Repainted the living room walls back to the faded blue Grandma loved. Ripped up the fake modern rug Charlene brought and dragged Grandma's old one from the closet. I went room by room, not just to make it mine, to make it hers again, because I didn't want the last version of her house to be the one they tried to sell on Airbnb. I opened her boxes, all of them, letters, journals, old bills, family photos, some I'd never seen before, her as a teenager, holding hands with a boy I didn't recognize. In one drawer, I found a flyer, handwritten, creative afternoon with Emma, free for kids. It was mine, from when I was 16, She had kept it, tucked it away like something sacred. I sat down in the middle of the floor and cried so hard I thought I might pass out. Because for the first time since all of it began, I remembered who I was. Not a woman under siege, not a girl defending a house, but someone who once made art with kids on the front porch just because she wanted to see them smile. That night, I started sketching again. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, just to feel color again, to feel movement, to remember that life still existed beyond survival. And that's when the idea came, not as a plan, not as a grand gesture, just as a whisper, a memory of what she said to me the last time I saw her alive. Keep this house full of life. I hadn't done that, not yet, but maybe I still could. It started with paint. I chose colors Grandma would have hated, too bold, too bright. But I needed something different. Needed to see the walls transform, like I was peeling off the memory of them, of what they'd done, layer by layer. And maybe under all of it, there was still life. The idea wouldn't leave me alone. It followed me through breakfast, through late night pacing, through a dream where I saw Grandma on the porch again, hands in her lap, smiling at something just out of frame. Keep this house full of life. She hadn't meant it metaphorically. She meant life, the messy, loud, creative kind, kids and noise and laughter, music, paper scraps, clay under fingernails, crayons crushed into rugs, mistakes in every corner and joy in all the wrong places. I opened my laptop, pulled up the flyer she kept all those years. Creative afternoon with Emma. Free for kids. 16-year-old me had stapled those to the doors of every store in town. I only got 4 kids that first summer, but I remembered every one of them. I made a new version. Same headline, new address, same idea, just one difference. This time, it was going to be permanent. I filed the paperwork the next morning. Private community nonprofit center. Arts, expression, local projects. I named it after her, just her first name. The one nobody used outside the family, Maylene. It was enough. I didn't announce it, didn't post on social media, didn't ask for support. I just opened the doors one Sunday afternoon and waited. At first, no one came. Then one car, a woman and her son. She remembered me from high school, said she wasn't sure what it was, but he liked to draw and she thought, why not? He sat on the floor with markers and filled 3 pages in an hour. Didn't say a word. But when he left, he handed me one of the pages. It was a drawing of a house. This house, and me in the window, smiling. That night I cried again, but it was different. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was release. Because maybe the house didn't just survive. So maybe it was changing too. The next weekend, 3 more kids showed up. Then 5. One girl brought her own paints. A boy asked if he could try building something. A grandmother offered to help with snacks. By the 3rd week, I had to move furniture out of the front room to make space. And for the first time in over a year, laughter filled the walls. It didn't erase what happened. It didn't undo the lies or the fight, or the fact that some of the people I once loved would never look at me the same again. But it softened the edges. The town softened too. People dropped off donations. Not money. Paper, glue, brushes, books. One man brought a box of wood scraps for the kids who wanted to build birdhouses. Another woman baked cookies every Saturday morning and left them on the porch in a covered tray. No one said anything about Jim, about the court, about the fight, but they showed up. That was louder. That was what stayed. One afternoon, I found a note tucked under the doormat. No name. Just 3 sentences. She would have loved this. You did the right thing. Keep going. I never found out who wrote it, didn't try to, because I already knew. Even if it wasn't Grandma's hand, it was her voice. By the start of fall, we had workshops, music on Thursdays, journaling on Tuesdays, pottery on Sundays if someone remembered to bring clay. I never charged, didn't ask questions, didn't ask for anything really, just said, come in, stay a while, make something. I repainted the porch, built planter boxes, started saving for a new roof, and when I sat on the steps with my tea in the evenings, I didn't imagine locks being broken anymore. I didn't check shadows. I didn't sit with my back to the wall. I just breathed. The family I wouldn't get back. The version of myself I had to kill to protect what she gave me. The peace that came, not as a reward, but as a kind of aftermath. But when that ache crept in, I'd look through the window at the messy art table and the shelves of paper sculptures and lopsided paintings. I'd hear laughter echo off the hallway walls she once dusted every Saturday morning. And I'd remember, this wasn't the house they wanted. This wasn't the house they tried to take. That house is gone. I buried it under layers of color and noise and imperfect joy. And what stands in its place now is something they'll never understand because they didn't come here for life. They came for value, for control, for legacy they didn't earn and they lost, not because of courtrooms or evidence or recordings, but because I stayed, because I didn't run, because I fought quietly and healed loudly, because in the end, I did exactly what she asked. I still talk to her, not in any spiritual way, just in the quiet moments. When the sun hits the porch just right, when the windows fog up after I've been baking, when the house smells like lemon oil and dirt and memory. I say things like, I think you'd laugh at how bad I am with the roses. Or, you'd hate this rug, but the kids love it. And in those moments, I feel her, not as a ghost, but as presence, the kind that lives in small choices. A mug placed just so. A book spine worn down from years of rereading the sound the back door makes when it sticks in summer. That's what no one tells you about losing someone, that the grief isn't a wave that crashes once. It's a tide that keeps returning, slower each time, but colder. And when the noise is gone, the court, the fear, the threats, the silence, what's left isn't victory, it's emptiness. Even now, there are days I walk through the house and feel like I'm trespassing in my own life. The garden looks too green, the chairs too still. Sometimes I catch myself pausing before opening a drawer, like I'm waiting for someone to tell me not to. But no one does. They're all gone. Jim hasn't tried to contact me again. Charlene's name stopped showing up in public records. I heard through someone at the grocery store that they sold their place in Asheville and moved somewhere west. Hannah started college. She never said goodbye. Never wrote. But she didn't contest the ruling, and I take that as something close to peace. The neighbors talk to me again. They wave when they pass. They ask how the kids' programs are going. One of them brought over a photo album last week. Turns out his mother and grandma were in choir, together in 1956. He gave it to me like it was nothing, but it felt like an offering, a welcome back, into something I didn't know I still had access to. I keep it on the shelf now, between Grandma's Bible and a jar of buttons she never used but refused to throw away. Sometimes the house feels lighter, not in weight, but in breath, like it exhales now, like it's no longer bracing for someone to kick the door in. We built a mural last weekend. 20 kids, a box of chalk, half a dozen pizzas. The whole south wall of the barn is now covered in color. clouds, trees, names. One corner with Grandma's face, not perfect, but close enough. Big smile, soft eyes, a pair of crooked glasses someone remembered in surprising detail. I didn't tell them to do it. They just did. And that's when I knew. This house finally belongs to the future again, not the past, not the anger, not the fight. The land remembers the blood, sure, but it also grows over it, covers it in green, in noise, in new. But most nights, I just let it be. Let the night hum the way it used to before all of this, when it was just me and her and the sound of crickets outside the screen door. I don't know what happens next. Maybe one day I'll sell. Maybe I'll stay here until I'm old enough to forget what it all cost. Maybe the kids who fill this place with laughter will forget what it was before they came. I hope they do, because this house doesn't deserve to be a monument to survival. It deserves to be a place where paint drips on the floor and no one panics, where the windows fog up from cookies baking, where voices echo up the stairs, not in anger, but in play. She gave me the house, but I gave it back its life. What would you do in my place? Please write your thoughts in the comments. I will be happy to read them.